So Bucky, you think you could live without internet, right? I've raised a millennial dog. If somebody had asked me what my favorite component in a PC build was, I probably would have said something like a graphics card, maybe the processor. I might have even said just the cooler, because I really like messing around with cooling. But if I had to put my money where my mouth is, I might have to say motherboards. I have spent more money on trying different motherboards out than just about anything. Cooling would probably be a second, but I don't even think it could be a close second, because for some reason, I have always got to find the perfect motherboard. I wouldn't have thought that that's my favorite component, but well, here we are. So I've had a couple of Ryzen boards now, and they haven't lived up to what I really wanted them to be. I mean, I really like what Gigabyte's doing with their Aorus branding, but the crosshair kind of kept its curse for me, at least in my opinion. So I decided that I needed to pick up an Asrock X370 Taichi and see if it would live up to the expectations I was hoping it would have. So we're gonna go ahead, take a closer look at this motherboard. We're gonna review it, and we're gonna see, hey, does it measure up? And you know what, guys? I think I can at this point make a fairly solid claim of who I would say has the best AM4 X370 motherboard. So we'll take a closer look at the BIOS. We will take a closer look at the board itself. We will do some testing and then wrap this guy up. So in my incredible rush to get this board swapped out, I kind of forgot that I usually like to do my closer look before I install the board, but well, here we are. So one of the big things that is going to separate Asrock's Taichi from a lot of the other boards is what it doesn't have. And you're probably thinking, huh? And well, that's because that's what's good about this board, is what it doesn't have. So first off, if you look across the bottom here, I've got two USB 2.0 headers. You know how many boards are starting to axe those and only even leaving you one? But you know how many things like fan controllers and coolers are using those? So having two is nice. In fact, I kind of still wish that some boards would keep 3 or 4 of them on because of components using them. Second off, we don't have any kind of security header or anything like that. So, all right guys, hold on a second. Dog, I love you and this is great, but now is not the time. Okay, go lay down, go on. Sorry about that, but my dog just needed love. So there's no security header or TPM feature. Yeah, I get where that can be useful in some special cases, but probably not for most of us. So we do have two USB 3.0 headers. That is a good thing to have. We do have lots of fan headers. That's a good thing to have. Two M2 drives, another nice thing to have. We have 1, 2, and 3 RGB headers, which is nice. We don't have any on, off, or reset buttons within the board. Okay, so we don't get all that extra little bits for overclocking. But really, once you get these guys connected, you're probably not using those either. The big thing that Asrock trades by not only saving money on that, because their boards are usually pretty cost effective, but then we have this crazy amount of phases on our VRM. So to me, that's just a great trade. I'm really digging the white. White reflects a lot of the RGB LED stuff, so that's kind of nice. Of course, we do have reinforced slots. That's nice too. Last thing, and this is going to be a little bit of actual review, but their Purity Sound 4, second best built-in audio I've heard from motherboards so far. Yeah, I mean, so far nobody has beat Creative Sound Core 3D. But this guy, even though it's still using the Realtek, what is it, the 1220, I believe, even though it's still using that Realtek codec, this Purity 4 amplifier is the second best I've heard plugging into, which I was impressed with. I didn't think I would come even close to what Soundcore 3D was offering. So that made me really happy. Let's look at that I/O panel real quick. Once again, highlighting what Asrock doesn't have. One Ethernet port. How many of us are going to use two? I mean, maybe that's useful, more useful than I know, but I have a feeling most of us are only going to use the one Ethernet port. So we have a good number of USBs. We got a total of 8 USB ports. Maybe it would be nice to have 2 more, but even then, for how many things I've been plugging in lately, I'm still not coming really that close to filling them up. I'm using, maybe about 4 or 5 of them in the back, so it's kind of close, but I would still have my 3.1 port, and I think I'm actually only using maybe 4 in the back. What does that trade-off get you? It gets you built-in wireless. That's the kind of stuff that makes it completely worth it. So far, this board's looking like it's got some great stuff. So let's go ahead, peek at the BIOS before we get into our testing results. Alrighty, let's go through these BIOS settings, shall we? Okay, so the first page, overclocking tweaker. Oh hey, it started me already in the bottom, so go back up to top here. So that's because I was, double checking and going through everything. So yeah, this first setting here, Asrock Sapphire Boost, yeah, it is literally a setting to boost the clock speeds in your graphics cards if you have Sapphire ones. I don't know if it would work with other cards, but I do have 2 Sapphire R9 290s in this build. So yeah, I have Crossfire on really hot cards, so I haven't dared try that one just yet. Just a little too risky for my taste right now. But yeah, and this is also my main system. So CPU frequency, once you go to manual, you can overclock it. Guys, I do want to do an overclocking guide with this motherboard. Ryzen is very easy to overclock. It won't be very extensive per se, but there's some neat little tricks I learned about it that I would like to share. So maybe soon, I will see. So let's get to one of the weaknesses here about the Asrock BIOS, and that is DRAM overclocking. So if you notice, you can either load an XMP profile or you can switch it to auto. And those are the only 2 choices you have. Once you set the profile, then you have to run around and manually set all of these timings to overclock the RAM. It's kind of a bummer because compared to some other boards, I will just set my main megahertz frequency here and let the timings do auto to kind of find a rough stable point. You can't do that with Asrock. You can still overclock, but you kind of have to know your timings and your voltage and stuff ahead of time, and it's a little finicky. I think this is an area that Asrock needs some work on, is RAM overclocking in the BIOS, getting those settings smoothed out a little bit more. So yeah, coming down here, here's your LLCs. I set my SOC, my VDD CR SoC, and my, of course, normal CPU to level 1 because that actually gives you, as you ramp up to full load, about what, 5/100ths of voltage boost as you're going to full load, which is nice when you're setting a flat clock speed. So yeah, not too bad. These timings, when you set manual overclocking, they automatically hit themselves. So all around, I actually really like their load line calibration. There is some higher levels of voltage control out there, but it's kind of needlessly complicated. So this is keeping it simple and easy, and I like that. Most of these settings, you're not gonna have to worry about here. You might want to go ahead and go in there and make sure SVM mode is off if you're not using any virtualization, but it probably doesn't make any difference anyway. I disable things I don't need, like IO, MMU. One thing though you will want to keep in mind, and I want to point this out, so there's not really much to do here as far as settings, but if you have a SATA M2 drive, then you need to put it in the M2.1 slot. This is the only slot that will support SATA drives, which is weird because it's their super boost slot. This other M2 slot, which is kind of more of a standard, like only 20 gigabits per second or whatever slot, doesn't support SATA. It only supports NVMe, but it's the slower slot. I find that strange, but I mean, I don't see it as even being a big deal either. And I mean, if I had the choice, I would still put my SATA drive in the faster slot anyway, even if it doesn't make any difference. So yeah, I kind of wanted to see if there would be a difference though in the performance between this slot and that slot, but I have a SATA drive, can't do that. Okay, so yeah, not much else here. You've got a little bit of configuration for the PS2 port. You've got some configurations here for power. Nothing to worry about there. These two are AMD settings that, quite frankly, I wouldn't touch. Just leave them alone because they're all autoed and they're probably going to be fine unless you're a really, really advanced user. RGB control is all numbers, and that's not too bad. I mean, it does give you some pretty intricate control, but you do have to kind of like punch numbers in to get the right shade and then keep looking. But the numbers do update in real time. So if I change this number to say like 95, I will actually see the light change when I do that. So that's not too bad, but it would be nice to have like a color wheel on this GUI interface. Hardware monitor, of course, got all kinds of settings here that you can mess with for voltage and stuff. But one of the big weaknesses Asrock has always had is their CPU fan control. Kind of sucked. And I tell you what, they have changed that. Look at that, guys. There are 4 temperatures to adjust, and then you can set your percentages for the duty cycles for each temperature. That's a very nice custom fan curve that you can set. It would be nice to have, like I said, a GUI graph, but that's not as big of a deal because this is very easy to set. As it is, their silent mode hits the spot for fan. I mean, it's like they really made sure that their like automatic temperature controls were really set to work well with Ryzen temperatures. I'm impressed with that. This is the best board with default fan speed modes on the CPU that just have really good noise levels that are what I expect. Silent mode is silent, standard is kind of average. Performance load is actually performance. It's the best that I've seen. So good job there, Asrock. Got our security thing, not gonna worry too much about that. Okay, boot. There's only disabled or ultra fast. I still wonder if I kind of wanted to fast in between there, but it's so easy for me to get in the BIOS whenever I'm like, I want to adjust the setting. And if I ever just don't care, then I'll just go to ultra fast again and then get that extra, what, 2 seconds. It's really just not a big deal, so I've just left it disabled. I kind of think they may have made a good choice there. The only thing that's important to realize though is if you want to take advantage of full UEFI boot, make sure you come in here and disable your CSM. That way you are completely utilizing the UEFI BIOS with the CSM compatibility. Otherwise, this board is going to pretty much default you into UEFI. If you enable the CSM compatibility mode and you want to do a legacy boot, then make sure that you get all these OP-ROMs set to legacy. And then you can do like a, legacy boot. But that's, they don't offer a choice. I mean, technically it's still running UEFI in the BIOS and they're using a CSM compatibility to do legacy. But yeah, with Windows 10, you shouldn't have problems installing. I've yet to have problems installing Windows onto an AMD system. It's very smooth. So same thing here, I didn't have issues. So I would say just disable your CSM compatibility. And then as always, we've got, your save changes and stuff. You do get to have a boot override here, which is a good feature to have. It does remind me of one more thing that I wanted to point out. The user profile is a little wonky right now, and I think they need to maybe adjust that. If I go and, so I saved my profile, and you can see there, I've got my 3850. If I load that user default, my screen goes black and my system kind of just freezes. I've let it sit for like quite a few, like 10-15 minutes to see if it ever jump out of it, and it never does. So the saving and loading user default's kind of not working right now. I didn't try a setup disk for it because I just kind of got tired of freezing the system and it didn't really matter. I kind of memorized all my settings anyway. But just keep that in mind, guys. Until there's a BIOS update that fixes that issue, you may not want to use the profiles just because it kind of freezes the system, it seems, and then the profiles don't seem to quite load. There's our quick look at the BIOS. Now let's go into, well, I say quick, it wasn't that quick. But hey, I wanted to really cover some highlights. Let's go ahead now, hit the testing results. Okay guys, let's get into these testing results. Let's start out with the first thing and the number one reason why I was wanting to get the Asrock board, and that's overclocking. So Asrock puts a 16-phase VRM on their board and claims that that'll keep temperatures lower, things like better improved voltage stability, so on and so forth. Well, there's only one real test that matters at this point then is, can you overclock higher? Does that make any difference on Ryzen? And, well, does it lower the temperatures on the chip? Because even though the motherboard itself might be a little lower on the temperatures, which is not a bad thing, if it's like 10 degrees difference even, if you're running at 40 degrees on the Asrock when other boards are running 50, does that really matter? On a day-to-day use, no. Now, if other boards are running 90 degrees and this board's running 40, that does matter, because then you might have some voltage instability issues. But you know, anything below 60, 70 degrees, pretty much gonna run pretty solid anyway. But if the chip itself could be less, and that's great. So let's start out first with overclocking frequencies. One thing that the 16-phase VRM proves to us is that it will not give you more overclocking headroom in and of itself. There was no special stability that was happening with the Asrock Taichi that allowed me to bump my core speeds up higher with my 1700X than on my Asus Crosshair, which is the board I'm directly comparing against. I had both at about 3850 megahertz, but the Asrock does boost that a little bit higher. So the way that Asus does their default clocks, it kind of, I don't know if it's inadvertent or not, but the core clock is a little bit lower than what's rated. So I would have to bump the multiplier a little higher to get close to the same clock speed. Well, Asrock, I'm not having to bump the multiplier as high, even though I'm hitting within about 9-10 megahertz of frequency change. So that was interesting for one. Asrock seems way more confident in the fact that, hey, we're going to pretty much hit those multiplier frequencies on the nose. And so that was nice. But then I did an OCCT run with the core temp. And here's where it got interesting. The Asrock X370 Taichi had a higher V core, so it's using a little more juice to keep those 1700X clocks up to the higher level, and it had a little higher megahertz frequency, which are two combinations of higher temperatures, 5 degrees lower. Man, that is impressive. That means our 16-phase is doing the main thing it's claiming, lowering temperatures. So with that though, I also took a look at memory. Now, on one hand, the Asrock was beating the crap out of the Crosshair because it could actually run my Gale Evo X RAM at the full rated 3200 megahertz RAM speed. I don't know why, but even after the latest BIOS revisions on the Crosshair, I couldn't get it to run the RAM stable at 3200. I always had to downclock it to 3033, I believe it is. And then that's the only way it runs stable. I kept getting blue screens, crashes. Finally, I ran OCCT with a 90% load on the memory on LinPack, and that's when I would figure out, oh, that's when I would get a crash within 30 minutes and realize my memory wasn't stable. Once I dropped that frequency down one step on the Asus board, it was fine. Asrock, no problem. Overclocking past that though is really, really finicky. And so if you want to actually boost your RAM frequencies, Asrock needs to do some work there. You can only set an XMP profile, and then you have to go and manually change settings after that. There is no auto that really works, and maybe that could be some of the effect of the Gale RAM too. Every RAM stick, every RAM manufacturer is going to be a little different. My theory is that at least when it comes to that compatibility with the Crosshair, Asus puts a little more effort on the name brands like Corsair and G-Skill. And because of that, they end up having instabilities when you start mixing off brands, or at least what they would consider off brands, with their parts. So moving on from there, we go into the benchmarks though, and everything is pretty straightforward on the benchmarks. As you would expect, you know, things like ADA 64 and various other memory-based benchmarks, they're gonna have maybe a slight benefit because we actually run a little higher megahertz, but it's super minor, not a big deal. I did run into an anomaly with PC Mark and CPU Mark in that, I don't know why, but the Asus board got like a 1,000-point higher score than the Asrock, and it was very consistent, and that kind of blew my mind. So then I went to my Aorus motherboard with an 1800X, and it had a lower score than the Asus with a 1700X, even though the frequencies are the same. So I don't know what's going on there, but it seems like CPU Mark is favoring the Asus board, which I don't like. That concerns me. Could be nothing, I don't know, but it's there. After that, the rest of our benchmarks are good. Now, I did have some weird storage anomalies in the Asus that I expected would reflect on the benchmarks. It didn't. We will go into some actual user experience in a second. But overall, everything was pretty neck and neck. So it's not like the Taichi is going to give you some magical boost in performance, but I did like the stability of, at the very least, running my RAM at default clocks and the lower temperatures. That's not the whole story. Let's talk about my experience with the boards. Things that are hard to really put a benchmark to, but are definitely issues that were there. Okay guys, look at this. This is my handy dandy little note card. What I was doing with this guy is I was putting notes down, and as I was using the Asrock Taichi, anytime something would jump out to me and I'd be like, whoa, that's nice, or huh, that's not very good, I'd write it down so I wouldn't forget about it. Let's talk about the nice things. Number one, and this is going to be a direct comparison to the Crosshair 6 that I was running before. And guys, I'm not trying to bash Asus. I want to clarify. I've had some amazing boards from Asus. I'm not trying to say that there's something weird. I do, like with their company as a whole. But I do think their Crosshair line is cursed. The Crosshair 5 with Bulldozer back in the day had all kinds of weird issues there. Crosshair 6, at least they weren't major big issues, but still some wonky issues. So number one, the sleep LED function. Whenever I would shut my computer down with the Asus Crosshair, the LEDs on the board would go to white and be shining the whole time. Now, I've got an actual computer room, so that doesn't affect like my sleep or anything, but it annoyed the crap out of me because I'm like, why is this light not just turning off? So I go into settings and go, oh, sleep LED. Well, let's just make it to go all the way off. Nope, still on. The color would go away. I would have a purple scheme like I have here with the Asrock. That would go away, it would turn white, and I'd have this white LED flashing. Now, if you've got your computer in the same room as you sleep in though, the white LED is gonna be obnoxious. Asrock, when you shut it down, all of its LEDs shut down except for like maybe a minor little power light one that's normal on motherboards. And even then, it's just, you know, really it's not very noticeable at all, like just any normal motherboard that might have a small little power sleep light on. Let's go to voltage regulation. So one of the things that I noticed with the Crosshair 6, you can do all their Digi Plus settings and get things down, but it's very complicated. It takes time, it takes effort. You have to go through a ton of settings to get it. Asrock relegated their settings to just a simple, easy LLC level. Now, you've got two places in the BIOS that you can set voltage. The first spot, the one that's right above right next to the frequency settings in the BIOS, that was interesting because what it would do is it would keep my voltage regulated the same way as most boards. It would have it set to a pretty good flat line with an LLC level 1. As I load would go up, my voltage would raise just slightly instead of dropping. That's kind of normal. But once my processor goes to idle, even though I've set a manual core clock, the voltage will drop down to like under a volt and give me that extra power savings. That's really cool. I've never seen that before when I've overclocked a CPU. If I use auto settings, that's normal, but not when I overclock. Now, if I go down the list of the overclocker tweaking settings and adjust the voltage at the bottom, then that baseline voltage stays consistent no matter what the CPU load is. But that's a lot of flexibility. Now, I don't know if Asrock did that on purpose or not, but keep doing it, guys. That was fantastic. Number 3, audio. I already mentioned that, and I'll just touch on it again. Second best audio I've heard, very happy with it. Let's talk about powering off entirely. So if you shut your computer down, unplug it, take it somewhere, completely depowered. Whenever I would have the Crosshair 6 in there, I'd plug it back in, I'd turn it on, it would boot up, it would turn itself back off like it was saving BIOS settings again, and then turn it back on. Every time. If I completely depowered the system. I don't know why. I thought it might have been the memory issue, but once I got the memory stable, still did it. Never understood that. If I take this computer and unplug it and completely depower it, plug it back in and hit the power button, it just boots right up with the Asrock Taichi. Yeah, like nice. Why is Asrock giving us that kind of quality of life? They're doing a fantastic job. All right. No, where am I? 1, 2, 3, 4. Number 5, numlock actually works. So you know how Windows 10 is supposed to remember your numlock stage? And so that way, if you want your numlock to stay on when you're using a PIN to log in, that it will actually stay on. Never did with the Crosshair 6. Don't know why. Guys, I gave Asrock an unfair advantage. I didn't even reinstall my OS. Didn't reinstall it. I used the same OS that was installed for the Crosshair that had a fresh install as now it's running on this Asrock board. Numlock works fine. You tell me why, because that one I'm not sure. Alrighty, and then finally the load times. This thing boots up really fast. I mean, it has a little bit, maybe longer of delay for the Eufy screen to show up, but holy crap, it loads into the OS way faster. And I had both systems on, you know, no fast. Actually, I had the Crosshair on a fast boot because it had that middle option, and sometimes I would miss getting into the BIOS, but then it would still take a long time to load Windows. This guy only has disabled or ultra fast. Well, ultra fast, you can't boot into it, so I don't want that enabled when I need to go back into the BIOS. I like to be able to just hit the delete key. But then it just gets to that OS screen. Sometimes I wouldn't even, I've got a normal SATA drive, wouldn't even see the circle. So there we go. Guys, the wonky issues, I've already touched on them. The memory overclocking, yeah, not very great. Like, it does good with the XMP profile, but after that, it's a little bit iffy. And then I already mentioned how the BIOS user profiles don't really work. Those are my main issues that I've had with this board. Asrock has exponentially increased my experience. Let's go ahead and give this guy an award. So naturally, you might be concerned. Asrock is sitting here putting 16 phases of VRM on a board. They're gonna have a couple M2 slots. They're gonna have shielded PCI, reinforced PCIe slots. What kind of price is this board gonna have? Well, the board is going to have a price of $185 on both Newegg and Amazon, which is maybe a little bit higher than some of the boards out there. For instance, in comparison to some of the Aorus offerings, it might be kind of even, a little higher depending on the sale that's going on. When you compare it though to the Asus offerings, it's quite a bit cheaper, which is amazing. But it doesn't end there, because Newegg has been running a $30 rebate for some time now. So that sounds like that's going to be a normal offering. Guys, that is an amazing price for this board, which means you must have this board. Period. Like, this is amazing. Now, I say period, I get that there's going to be some exceptions, and you know, obviously if you're going to build an Intel system, then that board's not going to help you very much. And I don't know how well their Taichi lineup works for Intel. I only know how it's working for Ryzen. But guys, if you are going to build a Ryzen system, this is the only board I'm going to recommend right now, and there's two reasons for that. Number one, it's the most stable board I've used, and that makes me extremely happy. This board is just super stable. Aorus is kind of a close second. I really do like my Gaming 5, but I did have one weird anomaly where I could not get I thought the board had fried. I couldn't get it to turn on. And I reset the BIOS and did those things. Nothing worked. It wasn't until I completely depowered the board and popped the CMOS battery out that it came back and it was fine and back to normal. But that freaked me out. I haven't had that problem with Asrock. I've had a couple of times where it freezes up, but I can still hold the power button and get it right back to normal. Guys, this board is more stable. Ryzen gave these companies a huge challenge, and Asrock is the one that delivered. They are the top of the line. Also, this is the only board I feel like I can say, if you buy this one, you will keep this X370 board instead of upgrading to X470 when Ryzen 2 comes out. Because this board, I think, is the only board ready for Ryzen 2. The rest of the boards are going to get scrapped, but this board's ready. Guys, this is, in my opinion, a pure overclock must-have award within the AMD landscape, because it does so much, and with a $30 rebate, a great price. Fantastic job from Asrock, And I think this is a board that'll allow you to upgrade to Ryzen 2 or Ryzen 3 down the road without feeling like you need to get a new board. They did it such a good job right. This is the only X370 board out there. Now, is Asrock going to have some trouble when 470 comes out? I bet. I bet they're going to have some trouble. If they don't up their RAM capabilities and some of those little quirks I mentioned, those are actually going to hit them hard by the time 470, the X470 chipset comes out. But guys, if you're wanting to do this before Ryzen 2 releases, this board is definitely worth it in my opinion. So there you go, guys. Let me know what you think of the review. I know I had to talk about some things longer than usual, but I hope my talking points were helpful. Otherwise, I wouldn't have done them. Like and subscribe if you want to, and I will catch you later.